thank you all for coming today. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. I'm Kim Anderson. I'm the ASLO subcommittee chair. What am I? For the college. My co-presenters are Dr. Eva Bagg, who is the Associate Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, and Dr. John Hetz, who is our new research consultant in the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. And they both are very supportive of the outcomes process and will be also interjecting and providing us with some very valuable information as we roll along in our presentation today, which is talking about effective results and actions for your course assessment plans. So we're going to be talking course assessment plans. How do I get this off of here? There you go. Okay, very good. All right. So we're going to be talking about course assessment plans and your results and actions. Up to this point, I'm hoping you all have a memory that you have written course assessment plans, the first 3 columns of everything. All right. Then what you're supposed to be doing is collecting assessment evidence up, and then what do you do with it? That's where column 4 and column 5 come in, the results and the actions that were taken. So I'm going to give you just a quick review of where we've been and where we're going with all of this. We are doing the outcomes assessment process here at the college to follow a cycle of planning implementation. It's very good for improving student learning, so you can talk about your curriculum, your pedagogy, student learning, how all of that is working. Faculty plays a central critical role in all of this. It encourages collaboration. The whole point of the outcomes assessment process is to get evidence so that faculty can sit down and talk about student learning in their courses, in their programs. Sometimes mostly within the discipline, but also outside of the discipline with other areas. So that's all helpful with all this. And then also, this is the practice that professional educators go through. They look at their courses, they look at their students, they look at the learning that's going on, and then they talk to each other about all of this. There's a fancy term called the scholarship of teaching and learning within your discipline. And so that's what this structure is helping everybody go towards. Hopefully you know that the course assessment cycle aligns with the course review cycle. This is 6 years cycle. This means you need to be assessing your course SLOs at least once within that 6-year cycle. You can do more if you want. And there are some faculty around here who, with their really important courses, decide that they want to put their courses on a 2 or a 3-year cycle, which is perfectly acceptable. But you have to do it at least once. You have to assess your SLOs at least once in the 6-year cycle. There are some people that are trying this out every year. That's a bit much. That's a bit much. And remember, we have the 3 M's. Make it measurable, make it meaningful, and make it manageable. And so assessing a course every year, maybe not so much manageable. You got to try it out, but you need to be careful about that. So some management issues as you're going through and starting up this cycle. You do need to have some type of internal structure within your department. Now, we have the SLO officers. We have lead faculty identified with most of your courses, I am hoping. But the emphasis here is that all faculty contribute to course assessment of SLOs. Everybody has to do their piece. This is not a process where you can dump everything on one person and say, okay, fill out the paperwork. This is not paperwork. These are the discussions. These are integral to your curriculum, your pedagogy, and all faculty need to be contributing to this. This is full-time, absolutely, and part-timers, absolutely, need to be contributing. They're valuable assets to the departments. When are you going to do all of this? You have already expressed this in your assessment plan in column 2. When you're going to collect up the information and in which semester you're going to analyze and report out your findings. We're recommending now that you implement the outcomes assessment by course, not by individual SLO. So you're going to be assessing your course, all of the SLOs in your courses every time you do the cycle. You can analyze and divide up each course by SLO, but if you have 2 to 5 per course and you're trying to manage all of this, it's going to become very, very, very confusing. So our recommendation, though you can do that, you can do that, but our recommendation is you implement by course. So you assess all the course SLOs at the same time as you go through all of this. Internal management, you need to have some type of chart so that you know which courses are coming due, what you should be doing for each of your courses, who's responsible for what, when is it due for course review. There are some open source tools. A good old Excel spreadsheet is a good way to do this. TrackDat, our database system for program plan, program review, and outcomes assessment, it has a tool in that. The SLO officers, the new SLO officers have all been exposed to all of this. So your SLO officers are going to be keenly helpful in helping you develop some type of internal management structure and communication structure for all of this. This, as a review, is the entire outcomes assessment process. It is displayed here for you as a loop because this is a continuous process. We have gotten to this point. We're right here, right now. We are now going to be talking about the results and your key findings and conclusions, the actions you've taken, so that we can assess it again and see how it's doing and how can we improve student learning. And this is an ongoing process. Here it is as the 5-step process. This is based on the Nichols model, which is a standard national model that we use. It was developed for the reporting of course and program across the campus. So not only are the instructional programs and departments using this model, but also the service areas of the college are also using this model. So we're all in this together. All right, sort of look familiar, I'm hoping. Okay, there's the 5-column model. You put your outcomes in the first column. You have your assessment task, the what, the how, the who, the when. Prompts are there for you there. The third column is your expected achievement, success level, and the students you're going to include in your assessment. This is probably the point you're at because this is what you should be doing right now, collecting your assessment evidence at this point. So you're going to be collecting it up in 1 semester, 2 semesters, however many semesters you've said you're going to do it here, you're collecting this up. Once you have it all collected up, now you've got to move to column 4 and column 5, which is the crux of today's presentation, where we're going to be talking about the actual results, any key findings, any highlights that you've seen, good and bad, and what kind of conclusions can you draw from this information. Then what kind of actions have you taken to adjust your course to improve the student learning course, and then when are you going to check it again? Basically, that's it. Okay? Now, you have your assessment plan. This is the ongoing part of this whole process. Eventually, this is going to get stabilized. You're going to finally settle on the outcomes that are the number and the wording that's just right. You're going to finally settle on an assessment tool that's really meaningful and reflective of what you're going to do. You're finally settling on what your success levels and the students and how you're going to be doing all. Eventually, this is all going to settle down. Right now, maybe not so much. Maybe we need to update and refine all of that, and that'll be captured here, over here. Then you're going to try it again and see. But eventually, this is where we're going to do all the meat of our work for all of that. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you sort of see the vision of all of this? Okay, so let's talk about the results and the actions part of all of this. Column 4, step 4 in all of this is the results, the findings, and the conclusions. Once you collect up assessment information, you're going to have to make some time to sit down and talk about what it is, how it is, and so that means you got to have some planning. You're going to be having to use some days to do this. Regularly scheduled department meetings, flex days, emails, communication, and all that. You're going to have to figure out how you're all, but here again, everybody contributes to all of this. Then you're going to analyze, and your analysis is you have to highlight your key findings. You have to draw the conclusions about the needs and the issues that this information is telling you about the learning in the course for all of this. Then you need to formulate some actions that you're going to improve student learning at this point. Then you have to determine, column 5, the actions that you have now taken. Did you, have you adjusted them? We'll talk about this a lot more. Based on these conclusions, what actions have you taken? These things are immediate actions. We do not want you to say, well, we're still going to talk about it a little bit more. That's not an immediate action, okay? Something that you can do right here, right now, to adjust the course in any old which way, to improve the student learning, document it, try it again, and see if it helps or not. Yeah, Don.
When you say immediate action, I'm looking at things from last semester that I evaluated this semester, so my action will start next semester. I mean, I can take action now, tell them what they're going to do next semester.
But this is what you have done. Like, for example,
well, you say immediate, I'm thinking like right now, and I go, we're not going to do anything, alter anything this semester, but I'll inform them this semester how next semester will work.
That's
right?
That's immediate.
All right. I want to make
immediate in this realm, you're fine.
All right.
Okay?
Well, I want to be sure.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Okay. So, some things to consider. I sort of alluded to these, but now I want to make the point for sure. Time. You have to give yourself time as faculty to sit down and collect up the information, to actually study the information and count it all up and all of this kind of stuff, and then talk about it. And so time, you've got to actually factor that in. The management of this, it's aligning with the review cycle. What resources do you need to do this? And you need to plan. If you need any resources to do this, duplication, one of the things that I've been talking to several faculty about is that they've been putting down multiple choice tests. They're going to be using multiple choice tests, and they're using Scantrons. And one of the nifty things, oh, Jim's not here. Okay, one of the nice things about Scantrons is that they make these summary sheets that after everybody's bobbing their heads. Well, a lot of people don't know about this. And so you can put the summary sheet in, and it can disaggregate the information for you by question and by the choices that the students made, and you just shoot it through there. But the department's going to have to buy those summary sheets and all that. But it can help you quite a lot if you're going that route. So these are things that you need to plan for your resources available for all of this. Then you have to also plan for discussion, too. And I mentioned that before. This is a very collaborative model. Not having one person sitting in their office making decisions independently. This is much more than filling out paperwork, as I said before. Some other things to consider when you are going through this whole part of the process. Evaluation of the actual process. Okay? Is it meaningful? Is it measurable? Is it because look at the process. You may have to tweak the process a little bit too, and that's perfectly acceptable at this juncture. So, is it providing you consistent information? Is it robust information? Is it telling you something you want to do? For example, I was talking to a faculty member, and he did his first assessment of an SLO in one of his courses. And he came back and he says, they got 100% on everything. And I went, they did? And you go, yeah. And I go, does that mean everybody's perfect and life is good? And you're all laughing right now, because it doesn't, does it? Something was wrong with the process, right, with the assessment task and tool. And so then we talked about it, and we figured out that he needed to add more questions. He needed to change the questions to really zoom in on the SLO a little bit more specifically. Because even though that assessment worked when he saw him in class, it really, you know what I mean? So anyway, you need to think about checking, always making sure you check the process too. Not just the results blindly, but what it's all telling you. The application of the process. Can you use the information you're getting to actually improve student learning in the course? That's the whole point of all of this. So we need to make sure that the information you're getting is helpful information. Can you use this process to support and integrate with the planning process? Okay. Because outcomes is part of our program plan, program review process. Does that make sense? We've been sharing this information. I've been doing outcomes, and then program review's been over here, and hiring's over here, and scheduling's, and it looks like it's a very disparate process. But truly, all of these things do come together. And the outcomes evidence is going to be identified in your program review process when you're reviewing your programs. And your course information and your program information is going to be in that.
Want to add to that?
I'd love you to add to that since you're just sitting there. So.
Make us feel worthwhile. I just wanted to just highlight what Kim was saying, the integration between SLOs and program review. So for example, you know, say over time, it could be from your course level assessments or your program level SLO assessments. Or say you identify an area where, you know, you collect your assessment results and you talk about it within your department and see an issue and something that you may want to work collectively on to improve a specific student learning outcome. That can become a program goal in and of itself for program review. So you could, you know, write that as a goal and then use your SLO assessment results when you actually conduct your review to be very specific about how you succeeded in, you know, reaching that goal or closing a gap, so to speak. So that's really, you know, just really emphasizing how really student learning outcomes, I think, it gets down to the most specific level where you understand how to make changes in your courses and programs to improve other things like course completion rates, success rates, retention rates, and the number of certificates that students are completing in your course. It's really bringing it down to the level of student learning outcomes that helps you to refine your curriculum, your pedagogy, to ultimately achieve those other kinds of things. So just we really want to reinforce it's all about student learning, student achievement of their goals, but really this is the level at which you have the most control, and the assessment process is giving you the evidence to really validate what is working better than other things. So that's it for now.
Okay, for now. Thank you, Eva. All righty. So let's talk about column 4 and the gathering up of your assessment evidence. Obviously, it would help if you're all organized about this. And here again, your SLO officers are going to be your point people for all of this, but here again, everybody's contributing to all of this. But you do have to establish some type of internal protocol about who's involved, any internal deadlines that you're going to set so that you can meet those external deadlines, understanding that this is a regular cycle and getting that embedded in the culture of the faculty of the department. Discussion needs, meeting times, when are you going to do all of this? Are you going to set some time aside on Flex Day to have this kind of meaningful collaborative dialogue? Are you going to put this as a standing agenda item on your department meeting schedules? Are you going to call an extra get-together with small groups in your department? That's perfectly acceptable to keep the flow of all of this going. I'm saying don't become a statistician. I'm going to say that. Numbers are very, very good, but it's what you take from the numbers that is most meaningful. So don't get scared about, you know, numbers and percentages and frequency rates and all of that. That will help guide you in your discussion, but don't get stuck there on everything. Because then, of course, I'm going to do the infamous aggregate and disaggregate the information. Here again, you decide how much you're going to be combining the information up and looking across different areas, or you want to disaggregate it into discrete little pieces of information, because that may tell you something. You may find something quite interesting at that point. Be advised that the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, Dr. Bagg, Dr. Hetz, is here to support at a more broad level at the course level than at the course level. But they are excellent resources. Your SLO officers are excellent resources. ASLO subcommittee members are excellent resources. As we start getting more familiar with all of this, we're going to be helping each other out, sharing ideas and information. All of this will work quite nicely, I think. So we're still going to be in talking about column 4. Now we're going to talk about getting those results and those numbers. And Dr. Hetz is going to be sharing some interesting information with you. Okay, forward.
Okay. All we're going to do is talk a little bit about some basics of what you want to do in column 4. Just some very simple things that you want to make sure that you're doing as you're collecting your outcomes and reporting your outcomes. And so what you want to think about in terms of what you can do right now potentially is you can think about what you want to compare your outcomes to. So for starters, you might want to think about an obvious one, right? Comparing the outcomes that you observed to the results that you expected, right? What expected or desired level of achievement did you want? And so one of the things you want to make sure to do is report your outcomes in a way that compares it directly to that. So you want to keep that kind of framework in mind. You might have previous results. Some people have already started the SLO process. So you might want to think about, well, how are things changing in these outcomes over time? You may have a pretest. Some people have SLOs where they pretest particular outcomes and they post-test to get a better sense of the change that they're getting as a consequence of the course. You may want to break it out for different demographic categories. If you collect that information, it's always a good idea. You might want to compare outcome to outcome. This gets a little bit dicier. If you're going to do that, I'd love to be able to talk to you, but you might want to see which outcomes are being more effectively achieved and which are not. And then you might want to compare outcomes across different sections of courses. So these are types of information you might have and think about as you're framing what you're going to put in column 4. As you move forward, you might want to start thinking about how am I going to collect this information and report this information in a way that I can look at it over time. So you're going to want to think about how you assess your outcomes over time, how you tweak it or don't tweak it to make sure that you have the same information so that you compare it each time the course is taught or each time you go through the SLO assessment process. And then, of course, what you're going to do is think about in future assessments, right, evaluating the effectiveness of the actions that you took in column 5. Right? And so this is where that recursive process is going to come into play. You're going to continue to think about your results and compare them over time and the actions that you took to see whether or not they improve the process. For many of you, this is going to be very simple information. Most of you have had some exposure to this type of thing before. I just want to step you through some things that you want to make sure to provide when you're talking about your results. The first thing you need to do is describe your sample. Right? The sample very basically is just the people who you assessed, right? The people that you measured the outcomes on, right? The students that got the assessment instrument. One of the things you're going to need to do is indicate how many people were assessed. This isn't really surprising. Typically, we're going to talk about that as N, right? So I'm sorry, I'm going to put on my statistician hat a little bit and throw out some terms, but just so you know, these are the types of things that you're going to want to include, right? How many people were assessed and how they were selected from your population. And the population is just who you want to know about, right? It's the entire group that you're trying to draw inferences about through the outcome assessment process. Usually, this is just for course outcomes. It's just going to be students that are taking the course, right? So you're going to be sampling from that population. A key aspect of what you want to make sure to do is describe how you're selecting the students. How are they being chosen? Optimally, you want this to be random, but there's a lot of situations where that's not going to be possible. You need to talk about that because that's one thing you'll want to discuss when you're thinking about what the results mean. Do we have a sample that's accurately reflecting our population? And the procedure that you use to select that sample is going to determine whether or not you can make that judgment. A couple of key issues broadly, and then we'll talk about them in a little bit more depth. Is the sample that you're using, the number of students you're assessing, is it big enough for you to draw the conclusions you want about the population, right? Do you have a big enough sample size? With small populations like courses, it's very challenging. The utility of sampling gets better the bigger the population that you want to draw inferences about. And I'll give you a graphical representation of that in a second. And then the second question that I've alluded to already, does your sample match? Is it representative of your population, right? Does the people I've selected to stand in for my population, are they similar, right? Do they have the same attributes of the population as a whole, of the course as a whole, in case of course outcomes? So on sampling issues, just a couple of quick things. So how big a sample should you aim for, right? How many students do you want to assess? So what I've done is, just for something as simple as estimating the percentage that meet a particular criteria, right? So yes or no, did they achieve this, right? A very simple one dichotomous measure. If we want to have a certain amount of, a specific amount of certainty, is a place that you can go to based on the population size, right? How many students in the course, that you can go to get a sense of how many students you actually want to measure. Basically, my rule of thumb is for small populations where you're talking about things under 30 and to some extent under 50, you want to generally think about more comprehensive assessment, measuring the outcome with everyone, right? Because if you don't, right, to get to what reasonable people tend to think about as professional levels of certainty, right, plus or minus 5%. To get a good sense of a population size of 50, you have to sample everyone in the course but 6. Well, you might as well get the extra 6 people if you can, right? And so sampling starts to make more sense when you have lots of courses, lots of students that you're talking about, right? For smaller samples, for smaller courses, it makes sense to try and assess everybody, right? Which helps deal with some other issues to some extent. So what about representativeness? So that's sample size. What about representativeness? How can we be that the students that we sample match, tell us something meaningful or important about the population that we're interested in, the students that are taking this course? And we have to watch out for things that might lead to what people with statistician hats on or research methodologist hats on call selection bias, right? That we may be doing things that are getting us a sample that actually is very different than the population that we care about, all the students that are taking this course, right? So there's a variety of things that we might do by accident for convenience purposes that we might not want to do, right? So for example, I used to teach intro to psychology, and one of the things that I would typically do is construct my course so the final was optional, right? You could take it if you wanted to improve your standing in the course, but you didn't have to. If I built my assessment into that final, that would be a real problem because there's going to be selection issues. Not all students are going to be taking that final. I've built in a flawed selection process. If ultimately what I want to be able to do is look at this sample as representative of a population, I want it to be as close to a random or comprehensive a selection as I can. Other things we might do, you might say, no one would really do any of these things, but you say, well, I don't want to use course time. Maybe I'll just measure students who come to office hours, right? Clearly not a representative sample of students in a course. They're not the same as everybody. They're different. You would never want to sample course outcome data in that particular way. You might say, well, maybe I'll build it around course time. Again, you would never do this. But I'll build it around course time, but I don't want to use actual course time. So I'll just do it for students who can come early or students who can stay late, right? Again, those students are not representatives. There's differences between students who have extra time before a course or have extra time after a course than other students in your course. So you wouldn't want to sample in those types of ways. Sometimes we think about sampling by, well, maybe we'll make it an extra credit assignment, right? And that allows the students to start acting in a selective way, right? Certain students are going to say, well, I need extra credit, and will self-select to participate. We don't want to give students control over who's being assessed. We don't want to actively kind of create conditions about who's being sampled. What we want to do is try and identify the population and select from them randomly if we're not doing comprehensive assessment. Right? The other thing that we do want to do, if we're doing comprehensive assessment or sampling, we have to be very careful to try and get everyone that we've identified that we want to sample. That means when there are cases where people miss for whatever reason, if we want to be confident that we haven't created a methodological flaw, we need to try and go back and get that assessment from those people. So if we sampled 30 students out of a course of 100, right, we've chosen them randomly, but we only get 25, we have a real problem because those 5 students who we couldn't get to do it could be meaningful and different than the other 25. And so once you identify a sample, or once you identify that you want to do it comprehensively, you have to try as hard as you can, right, with reasonable limits. You got to keep it manageable. You have to do what you can within the time that you have. But you need to make sure to put in the effort not to just go, well, 5 people didn't show up for this assessment, so I got to let that go. You have to try and get them. OK. A couple of things on describing your results. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about any statistical information. Right? We're not expecting you to put on statistical hats. What you are expecting you to do is be able to do some very basic things with the data and treat it appropriately. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say data, with the information. So one of the things to think about is whether or not the data that you have is categorical or what you might think broadly is numerical. We talk about it slightly differently. We talk about interval data. But is it categorical or is it numerical? So some types of educational rubrics that you see sometimes have assessment plans that roughly resemble something like this, right? Where you have a below basic level, right? Somewhere below understanding 50% of the material. Basic, they're meeting the standard or close on all criteria, is 50 to 70%, kind of catching it. Proficient, 70 to 90%, they're meeting the standard on all criteria. And then advanced, people that are different, right? They are substantially exceeding the criteria set out in a variety of ways. They're setting themselves apart from the other participants, especially in category 3. People typically, when they measure things this way, want to average this information and say, well, overall, we had a 2.5 on our SLO here. You don't want to do that in this case because these intervals, right, the interval between 4 and 3 and 3 and 2 and 2 and 1 are not the same, right? So when we talk about intervals that are the same, right, if you go up a degree in temperature, that difference in degree means the same thing whether or not you're going from 30 degrees to 31 degrees or 90 degrees to 91 degrees. It means the same thing at every point on the scale, right? If you're thinking about the number of items completed, right? Going from 0 to 1 means the same thing as going from 9 to 10. It's one additional item completed. Going from 1 to 2 is not the same as going from 2 to 3. And it's certainly not the same as going from 3 to 4. Right? When people think about these, they often talk about people in category 4 as being categorically different. And so when you're going to report results in this type of rubric where you're using categories, you really don't want to use means. You want to use things like percentages. You want to reflect the percent or the number of people in each category. Right? Another example of this type of ordinal arrangement might be class rank. Right? You know that the first person in the class did better than the second person, did better than the third person. But the difference between the first and second person is not the same as the difference between the second and the third person, is not the same as the difference between the third and the fourth person. So you would never take an average class rank to describe how students in a class are doing, right? It's an ordered category, so you can think about where they are relative to each other, but you would never take an average. you would instead provide frequencies. So you take a simple count of the number of the students in the category and compare it to your overall N, or your overall count of students in the assessment, supplementing it with percentage. So just very simple. I know you guys know this, but if you were creating a frequency into a percentage, if you assessed 100 people and you had 5 people in a particular category, 5 out of 100 would yield a 5% percentage. All right, describing your results. If you have something more quantitative, right, you're measuring the number of things that students could do, or you're measuring things that, at the very least, where the interval between one and the next are very carefully standardized to be the same, then you're going to use measures of central tendency. Big word, but basically all that means is we're going to try and describe the overall sample using one number, something that's going to try and capture the middle of the sample. You might think of this as the executive summary of your information, right? I'm going to capture all these scores by my students with one piece of information. There are 2 key types. The mean, most of us think of this as the average, very straightforward. I'm going to take all the scores and add them together and divide by the total number of scores that I have. All right, so I add all the assessments and I divide by N. You want to be careful about summing across outcomes when you do this type of thing. Right? So one of the things that people might want to do is I've got 5 outcomes. Let me get a sense of my overall average of all these outcomes. Now, you need to be careful about combining across things that are different from each other. Right? So this is a sign from Nukayama. Population 562, feet above sea level 2150, established 1951 for a total of 4,663. It's ridiculous to add those things together. They're measuring totally different things on different scales. Right? You wouldn't want to take an average and say, on average, we're whatever that would be, 1,500 and something, right? It would be silly to do that, right? And that's why you need to be careful when you're thinking about your outcomes, right? You might have an outcome that's measured on a rubric, right? Maybe 5 categories. And you might have an outcome that's measured on a 7-category rubric. And you might have an option that's how many of these particular things that students achieve on an essay, right? More numerical. You would not want to combine across them. So you need to be careful about taking means across multiple outcomes. So if you imagine, again, 2 standardized assessments of outcomes in astrology, the number of astrological signs correctly identified, 1 to 12, and the quality of an astrological reading of someone on a 1 to 10 scale, these might look like they're about the same. One's on 0 to 12, one's 1 to 10. You might think, well, I can just combine them. You really don't want to do that. Lots of methodological and statistical reasons not to combine those things in an overall average. Keep them separate. Okay, so generally, we tend to lean towards using averages or means when we're reporting numerical data. There is an important caveat to that, and that is it's not always appropriate depending on how the information or the scores are distributed. Sometimes what we're going to want to use is the median score, right? The median is just the score in which half of the students or half of the people that you've measured your outcome on are below that score and half are above that score. It's very straightforward. It's basically the 50th percentile of the people that you've assessed. You want to use this when the mean is more ambiguous, right? That is, when you have situations where you have extreme scores or very broad distributions. I think I have a sample here. So if I had a 10-item test, right, with 10 scores, and most of the students are doing pretty well, getting 8 or more out of 10 correct, but one student that has a 0, that's going to have a significant effect on the average, but won't affect the median at all, right? And the median is probably a much better description of what's going on here, right? This 0 is going to really shift your results on an average in a way that's going to make your understanding of what happened more ambiguous. Right? So the mean drops down to almost 8, but if you look at the median is basically about 9. That means most students are doing pretty well. Right? And it's roughly distributed around exceptional performance on this particular exam. This makes it seem like it's distributed across more average performance. Right? The mean here with an extreme score, and often you'll have a couple of extreme scores, right, is problematic. And I think at this point I'm turning it back over to you. No?
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. So that was the first prompt on your column 4. The results, some things for you to think about when you start actually collecting up the results. Then another thank you. The second prompt in column 4 is your key findings. So you have all these numbers and these results that you had. Now you need to analyze those and evaluate those numbers. And that's where the key findings area in this is. And here again, through the discussion in the faculty and with other vested individuals perhaps, you know, whoever you invite in for these discussions, this is where you talk about the assessment, the numbers, the sampling, the process, and what it all says to you, and what has been working well. What has this shown you that is working well? And is there anything that maybe is not up to what we thought we should be doing in this? Discussing discipline-specific issues related to the course. Okay? That could mean curricular issues, it could mean pedagogical issues, it could mean student issues, you know, student basic skills issues. You can have all these conversations, as well as having conversations about the actual assessment process with all of this. And then use a critical eye and interpret it appropriately. Dr. Hetz has given you some information to think on about how does your numbers really, what are they really telling you in all of this. So you need to do that. Highlight the strong indicators. The whole point of this process is to get a balanced picture of the student learning that is happening in this process. So that means this side and this side, both equally. So I don't want you to always go to, well, that didn't, and go to the negatives. We always have a tendency to go to the negatives, right? So, but also look and see, it can be informative about what's going well and what's working for the students. And that's important to know too. So take a look at the information and see what was met, what was not met. Did you exceed anything? Remember that my previous discussion, exceeding may be good, exceeding may be not so good, depending on your assessment tool. And then report out on that. We're just asking for small little responses for each one of these prompts, what we call executive summaries. You know, a few sentences, a paragraph, whatever you feel expresses the discussion that occurred. So you're looking at both. Then you need to look at actionable information, actionable evidence in all of this. So what can you do about it? If you can't do anything about it, then maybe, you know, we just sort of leave that by the side and focus on what we can do within the constructs of our budget, our personnel, you know, the prerequisite structure of the course, and all of these kind of things. Here again, I come back. Make it manageable, the 3 M's, right? Make it manageable. Understand your time and your resources available. You can have the most elaborate assessment analysis, but if nobody's going to participate in it, it doesn't do you any good at all. So, you know, balance the pragmatics out with all of this. Here again, what worked well, what could be improved. Report out on both of those areas there. Then in your conclusions, you're in this whole area, talk about the SLO. Did you meet the SLO? Is the SLO? So take a look back at the SLO and keep that in your mind as you're trying to draw some conclusions. The response in this prompt, in the conclusion response, is the faculty discussion on all of this. Make some decisions at this point. We're very good at talking about things. We need to also then take the step into actually doing some things, now. So you need to make a decision based on the information, based on the key findings, based on the reflecting back on the process and the SLO, and then make a decision for that outcome at that point. If you have unexpected results, if there is something that's amiss, like the previous example I gave, put it down. That's okay. That's all part of the process. Any observations about the evidence that you can come to a consensus on, all of that will be in your conclusions for all of this. So be honest, be true. So then based on all of that, then you need to take a step. What are you implementing? What step are you actually implementing to improve student learning? And then you will reassess this in the next cycle to see how it's going. So you need to, what has been done? Don't say, we will do this in a year. No, what are you doing relatively? That's the immediate stuff we were talking about before, Dawn. What are we doing relatively right now? So write it in the past tense. We did this, okay? And then we're going to reassess this. That's very important. Now, here are some examples of the general areas that you may come up with some type of action that needs to be taken in your curriculum area. Maybe you're not emphasizing the right topics enough or too much, and this is what the assessment, and so then you may want to change your content page and how you emphasize. You may need to spend an extra week on a certain topic, or maybe one lesson, a little bit less time on some other ones, and rebalance how you emphasize your topics. The sequencing of your courses and the information in your courses. Maybe you were presenting topic A before topic B, but then all of this got you to thinking maybe you guys want to try to swap them around and present the content in a different order in the class. That might be something. These are just sort of giving you some ideas. Maybe you want to add some formative assignments. As opposed to just requiring the final paper, you have them write you a couple of drafts before you go along. Then you do that concluding assignment for all of that. More time on certain topics of concern. That's all having to do with curriculum. There are more examples, but this gives you a highlight of those. It may be pedagogical concerns or instructional concerns. You may want to try a different delivery method. You may want to use technology in your class a little bit more and see if that engages the students on a certain topic that may be more beneficial to them or not. You may want to do a little bit more group work or partner work up in the class. You may want to try to become aware of the students' varied learning styles. And maybe if it's mainly auditory, you may want to add some visuals in the class. You may want to add, maybe try out some class activities, some actual exercises in the class for them to try out to engage them at that level. You may want to try a combination, but these are conscious decisions that faculty are making to try things at the course level. Always recommending tutors, supplemental instruction for this. How prompt is the feedback are you giving your students when they do an assignment? Do the students have to wait a month before they get information back? Or are you going to make a concerted effort as the faculty to try to get it back within a week, the information, the results back in a week, week and a half to the students' assignments or exams or something along those lines? These are all decisions you can make at this time. Then the last area is the actual assessment, the process, the tool, the questions, the rubric, all that. And you need to look at the tool, you need to look at the SLOs. Were there any factors that impinged on all of this that you were unaware of when you wrote up your assessment plan? Maybe we need to tweak it a little bit and try it again. Here again, Dr. Hetz was talking about the sampling. Maybe you found a flaw in the sampling. So then you want to try it again with a more refined sampling as you go. Maybe your criteria was set too high, too low, wasn't quite right. All of these are reasonable results and actions that you can take to try it again the next time. But these tend to be most actions will fall in one of these 3 categories. So if you keep those in your mind, that maybe will help you as you start to look at everything. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? Okay, so we are documenting these actions. So here again, the extent of the change. These are not big, huge, massive changes. They may be. But by and large, they're probably going to be small, incidental little tweaks that you're going to be making to see if that can improve the student learning or not. Definite actions taken, okay? Identify the course faculty by the instructors of record for speech 60 or whatever, or who's going to be responsible. It's going to be all the instructors? Is it just going to be the full-timers that are going to be trying this out? Is it going to be, a selected group? Is it going to be on both campuses? I don't know. So you need to define out who's going to be trying all of this out. It could be everybody. Everybody who teaches the course could be willing to try this all out. You may just want to try it with a selected group of courses and sections. And that's perfectly acceptable too, if you want to try that out. You decide on all of this. Now, identify the time frame. That's when you're going to report out again. Remember, you've got to do it at least once within the 6 years. But if you have some real hardcore, heavy-duty courses that you want to keep a grip on, you may want to try, every 2 or 3 years, taking a look at those courses. But you decide the time frame based on the course review schedule. So you've got to keep that in mind too. Any follow-ups? There is a place in TRACDAT that if something happens mid-cycle, your SLO officer can upload some information in there. If there was a follow-up within a year or something like that that happened, you can do that. I put up here the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm hoping that you all are aware that we now have a Teaching and Learning Center on the first floor of the library building here at this campus. And the ASLO subcommittee is seeing that this is going to be a very important place for faculty to come together and have these kind of discussions about pedagogy, about curriculum, and about the teaching and the learning that goes on in courses at an academic institution. And so hopefully the Teaching and Learning Center, it's just getting up and running right now, but as it does, we're hoping to be able to partner with the Teaching and Learning Center group so that there will be a place for faculty to have ideas and learn new information about different kinds of instructional strategies, curriculum alignment, and all these things that are going to be bubbling up in the outcomes assessment process. Okay, everybody likes to have an example. So this is one of our examples, and so hopefully you'll help me a little bit on this one. So this is one SLO from one ESL class. This was their assessment task that they did. And this was what they were shooting for in column 3. All makes sense. You with me? Okay. They actually reported out some information for us. So we nabbed it and all of that. You can see what the results are. Do you want to talk about the results, since that seems to be your bailiwick a little bit more than I?
That's pretty straightforward. So.
That's great.
So all we wanted to do here is because, can I grab that side?
Sure, sure.
Is because we're working with a rubric right here, right? And one of the things that we want to keep track of is a lot of rubrics are going to lead to categorical data. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about talking about the percentage of students that are at each level rather than talking about averages, because that can be a little bit misleading. And so what we've got here is they're reporting, right, the N total, that's 100, right? And they're reporting the number of students, also giving us a percentage. We manipulated the data to make it a little bit easier to present. 55% of them met the criteria of scoring a 4 or higher, and they sampled everyone. So they have a full sample, a comprehensive sample. They were aiming for, I think it said 70%, right? That's not bad. right? Part of the point of this is not to say, oh, bad ESL, right? You missed your criteria by 15%, right? It's true that they didn't achieve what they want, but that's the starting point, right? This is to say, well, we were hoping for this and we got this. What does that tell us about what's happening in our courses? Or what does it tell us alternatively about the assessment we constructed, right? Both of those things are up for discussion. And so then what we have, they talk about who they sampled. They had it down here too. And what they have is a breakdown of where everyone falls. And you can see, once you start to look at this, right, that really what you have is a lot of people that are really close to their particular breakdown. There's 25% that are just missing their criteria. Well, it suggests the possibility that there's something about that cutoff that might be meaningful, or just understanding that there are a few students that are not quite making it can lead you to think about, well, what could we do as instructors to try and help a few more of these people across the threshold that we really care about, that we've identified as instructors of this course as important. And so then they're honest about it. Look, we're kind of surprised. I might have said disappointed by the low percentage. But then they note there's a lot of students in this category that are close. And then it continues on the next page. And they talk about, well, what conclusions did they draw? So they took this data as a starting point, and they started thinking about what was happening in these two courses. Right? I can't really speak to exactly all of these things, why they were important, what they thought about them, because that's their role. It's their discipline. They understand whether or not writing in multiple modalities or having essay structures that introduce more than one topic are problematic. As a research methodologist, I don't know, right? That's on them. And I think what they did here is really nice. They were very honest. I don't think this worked out. You don't want to try and fudge the data so it looks good. That doesn't help anybody, right? You want to report what happened and then think critically about it and think about, well, what can we do? What should we do? In some cases, you might not want to do anything, right? They may show pretty much what you expected, or they may not show what you expected, but the assessments are relatively effective. The students are doing basically what they can, so you might want to just think about small changes.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about number 5?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Okay. So based on their analysis, which is in column 4, then they needed to take an action. And what they decided to do is they wanted to modify their scoring guide, their rubric, to include the important features for each score. So they needed to tweak the rubric a little bit. They weren't happy with the way when they actually tried out the rubric, which is fine. That's great. And then they wanted to clarify the task we're asking the students to do, so they all came on board, and we clarified that we did that. And then we created guidelines for the selection of the type of readings that they were asking the students to do. And so that's what they did. And then they want to reevaluate it this coming spring and see how it's going for that. Now that's their choice. Okay? You could go a few more semesters out or something like that. But does that make sense to everybody? That is just a nice, they bulleted out. You can use a paragraph form. You can use bullet items. Whatever makes you happy. Just as long as it's real, truthful, helpful, and it's informative about what's going on and all of this. Okay? Yes, Eva. Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that basically the template, that Kim has developed, modeled off the Nichols model, and putting it into TRACDAT, just to remind the college what an improvement that is for us as an institution. When I first came here 3 years ago, people were doing student learning outcomes assessment work and thinking about it for a long time, but when I came here trying to make sense of it and understand how Long Beach City College was doing with regard to any of the core competencies or general ed outcomes, it required pouring through binders of reports, and I know that faculty did a lot of work writing oftentimes 10, 15, 20-page reports. So in a way, this makes it a lot easier for you because Kim's really just asking that you summarize this stuff and giving it a very focused manner in which you do that. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, that if you want to provide any of the raw data, TRACDAT allows you to do that. Really, you can upload anything from your Excel worksheets to streaming videos. If maybe you have a theater type course where you're evaluating a performance and using a rubric, that can actually be uploaded as evidence. The one thing I want to caution you about that, if you do it, say if you provide the scores of students in your courses, it's very important to remove the names, okay? So I really want to emphasize anonymity, protecting the student's identity is important. What I always used to do when I would submit my evidence for my SLOs, I would just take the student names and replace them with numbers. So you've taken care of that. If you're going to, say, upload a video, you want to make sure that you get the student's permission, again, because these become fairly public with TRAC-DAT. Other departments can, technically look at the student work. And the other thing is the faculty who are teaching different sections, for a given course. You want to protect those faculty members as well. And I'm saying this as another opportunity to reinforce that the college, I guarantee you as an administrator, we're not interested in looking at specific faculty SLO performance, whether or not you met the criteria. That's not the point of this at all. We don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the desire to do it. This is your data. This is how you make sense of it to make improvements. So again, I know there were some initial concerns when we were looking to purchase a software tool to help us, that it enabled us to protect the anonymity of faculty, but it's really up to the faculty in the department to do all that you can. I know in some areas where you just have, a few faculty teaching sections, it's a little bit hard to do that, but I would always, at the very minimal, replace a faculty name with a course ID. Okay, so just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you. So, a lot of information in the PowerPoint, so I want to take a moment, think about it. Anything pop into your mind right now?
Do you have to always date it?
You have to always date what?
The dates on
your results and your action taken, if you had dates on there.
Yeah, you could if you want to. If not,
I thought I said you don't have to date it, do you?
no, because we will date it when it gets uploaded into TRAC-DAT. You just got to make sure your SLO officer, look at him, and just make sure that he gets it in by the end of the semester, and then the date will be captured in TRAC-DAT. Okay.
So are we going to supply, the SLOs where I put together the assessment plan, and then I have copies of it, and you have it in your system? Can I just download in the results and evaluation columns in those, and then forward them to the SLO officer? Mm-hmm. That's okay to do that? Yeah,
just make sure that they know which SLO you're talking about.
Oh, I know.
So that they know where to put it in what field and track. But yeah, you don't have to do the whole thing, like all five. If you
I've already got the first three.
Right, you've already got the first three, and it depends on you and your relationship with your SLO officer, right? Okay. That once you guys get a routine going, knock yourself out. And so, in fact, Charlotte, I think with your department, you actually had them do it just in a plain Word document because you could.
At one point, yeah, because, in our original ones, we had all the different levels just in one thing to simplify, and then with all the results, they all had to be split out, and I was thinking, at least at this point, it would be easier to do it just in a simple Word document, and then to kind of paste back. We'll see how it works. We'll see what ends up being best.
And you have that kind of latitude. So yeah, so talking to your SLO officers, getting an SLO officer is always a very good thing to do because they'll be a good, valuable resource for all of you. So Trevor, did you have a question?
Just have a question. When you said about if you were to videotape something and you want the students to be aware that you're going to be downloading this, are you guys going to be providing forms for students to sign?
Sure, we can do that just to make it very formal and make sure that everything's on the up and up. I understand. I think there was one college where a student had filed some form of grievance for that protocol not being followed. It's the protection of human subjects.
We'll make sure that
I think that's rare, but yeah, we'll provide that for you.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay. Well, just because you need more information about this, we've got another handout. You just want to pass that on. Do you want to share this with Charlotte down there? On the Outcomes website, everything's there. Any question you have, the answer's there. Just finding it is the issue. So I thought I would give you a couple of pages. For the column 4 and the column 5 information, to go into a little bit more detail, you can see at the very beginning of this handout, we're talking about column 4, analysis and discussion phase, right here. And so a little bit more information about all of that. As you flip through, then you'll get to the point where it says course SLO actions taken. That's column 5. And then there's a little bit more detailed information about things to think about in column 5. So this just gives, these are up on the website, but I thought I'd give you a hard copy for them. But you can always share this with your colleagues. They are available electronically under SLO, on the Outcomes website, SLO course section. You know about how to get there, right? You all know how to get there? Anybody need me to show them that? You all right? It's a lot of information. We're all learning this together. We're going to be just fine doing this. We'll just keep rolling with a smile on our faces. Are there any other questions or comments? Yeah, Patrick.
You can't send it to the SLO officer anymore, this information, all has to go like to Tim.
Send what?
Fill out column 4 and 5.
Send it to Tim.
Send it to Tim, you don't send it to the SLO.
That's going to be shutting down the end of this month. Yeah, so that's why we had SLO officers coming on board to do that.
Well, Tim would have it, and then
he's the man.
He's the man. Okay.
Okay? Great. So here again, talk to your SLO officers, talk to your department heads, talk to your colleagues. If there are no other questions, I really appreciate you all taking the time and coming. Very important part of the process. Thank you all very much.